Hi there. How's it going? My name's Eric and I work at Lowe's. Add some color to your home this weekend with beautiful rose bushes. Right now you can get 2 rose bushes for just $10. And if your home's in need of a fresh coat of paint, you can also get an instant $5 off every $50 purchase of paint and paint supplies. So whether you're looking to add some color to your garden or your living room this weekend, Lowe's has you covered. Lowe's, let's build something together. Offers valid 5/5/11 to 5/9/11. Some restrictions apply.
Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, folks. At least it's afternoon here in the East Coast, West Coast. Good morning to you. This is Todd Waller with Raise the Bar Radio and my good friend and host, Mr. Michael McClure. You're here with us too, aren't you, sir?
I am, sir. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you. As you were saying earlier in the screen room there, it is one of those beautiful days outside here in Plymouth, Michigan, isn't it?
Yeah, and as I also just said, we have maybe 5 of these a winter where it's just absolutely perfect conditions, the totally blue sky. We had about 10 inches of snow that fell whenever that was 30 hours ago. It's all been cleaned up, and it's just pristine and picturesque. And I'm sure, we'll have maybe one more of these this year, and then we're hopefully back into the spring season and can just be glad that we survived another Michigan winter.
That's true.
There's a ringing endorsement, huh?
Well, hey, as I've heard it often called recently, Michigan's the high five state, and today is truly one of those high five days. Blue skies, sun, and just beautiful blanket of snow out there, although it is cold.
Well, I have never heard it called that.
Yeah?
But I'll take your word for it.
I just, last few months I've heard that pick up there, so new one for me recently too, so.
Yeah. Well, let's quickly recap what's happened since the last show. We had, as those of you who listened last week, we had Stefan Swanepoel on, who, industry giant, trends leader, observer, just all-around great and brilliant guy, and he was talking about his new book, Surviving Your Serengeti. And for those of you who haven't purchased a copy yet, the link to that, if you wouldn't mind, in fact, Todd, if you wouldn't mind throwing this in the screen room and maybe tweeting it,
sure.
Is AMZN, again, A as in Apple, M as in Michael, Z as in Zebra, N as in Nancy, .to/skills book, spelled with 2 S's and no Z's. Great book. Todd and I have both reviewed it, read it, reviewed it, created video testimonials. It's just a great book, and I'll stop there, but I would encourage anybody who hasn't checked that out to pre-order it on the Amazon link and check it out. Also, I don't recall, we did mention this last week, and we don't like to plug ourselves too often, but we meaning Professional One, appeared in the new issue of Stefan's Swanepoel Trends Report, which just came out, and we're very proud of that, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Also, a real quick shout-out to our good friend Chris Nichols, who many of you will know as at Utah RE Pro on Twitter, was featured in some sort of a WordPress professionalism section today, and on a really nice blog post that he wrote, and I wanted to acknowledge him because he's a great guy, a really excellent blogger, and a good friend. And then finally, I wanted to mention that we have some really exciting guests coming on next week. 2 people that I met when I did the Agent Reboot tour back in whenever it was, August of this past year. Deborah Trapin and Linda Aaron. They are going to be on talking about their company, which is Coldwell Banker, Bain & Seal, which spans Seattle to Portland. And they have a big bar camp coming up the first week of March, and they already have something like, I don't know what it was, 650 people signed up for that, which I'm not a bar camp person. I have never even been to one, but it's my understanding that that's enormous for a bar camp. So we're going to be really excited to have them on, and they're just really excellent human beings doing a great job leading their company, and we will be sure to learn a lot from them. Anything you wanted to add to that, Todd?
The only thing I wanted to add to it is that going back to something you said a little bit earlier, we did celebrate just a little bit last Wednesday with the other agents here at Professional One about our mention, and it was a good time to kind of gather as a company, if you will, and collectively just kind of pat ourselves very briefly on the back and enjoy time with fellow colleagues here in Southeast Michigan. So it was a nice honor. Yeah.
It was. And, to put it all in some perspective, today's guest, Matthew Shadbolt, is a gentleman that I met at Inman Connect, New York, and he and I shared a panel. I'll just tell this really quick backstory. He and I shared a panel about social media, and just a really fascinating guy, very intelligent, very strong opinions. He is and I'm probably going to screw up the title, but I believe he's the social media director of the Corcoran Group, which is the largest residential brokerage in Manhattan. And again, he'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard that they meaning the Corcoran Group, had $18 billion in sales in 2010, with an average price point of around $5 million, which those are staggering numbers. And I understand that Manhattan is a pricey real estate area, obviously, but nonetheless, those numbers I found overwhelming. So it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say about that and how they, what their secret to success and all that is. So without further ado, Todd, why don't you bring Matthew on?
Excellent. Matthew, and I have to agree with Mike here. Whenever I read your tweets, I now have an accent attached to them.
Hi, guys.
Hey,
hello,
Matthew.
sir. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here with you guys.
Well, it's an honor to have you, and you were sharing with us that it's kind of a brutally cold day today in Manhattan, and you had the misfortune of having to be out in the elements a bit.
Yeah, it's one of those classic take your breath away because it's so cold coming down the skyscraper canyons kind of days today.
Well, it's good that you're inside, and I hopefully you've warmed up now and ready to bring the noise on our show here. You were a dynamite guest there at the Inman event when, as I just mentioned, you and I shared a stage, and I thought you were clearly a crowd favorite and very engaging. And I immediately reached out to you and asked if you'd come on the show because I just knew you'd be a fantastic guest. Trying to put as much pressure on you up front as I can. Am I succeeding?
Very much so, yeah.
In fact, before we get into the questions that are more specific and relevant to the show, why don't you, if you don't mind, tell the listeners a little bit about your background, because I was fascinated. You started telling me your career path when we were at the Google party there in New York, and actually, you weren't able to finish the story. So why don't you tell the listeners quickly a thumbnail sketch of your resume that got you to your current position?
Yeah, no problem. I am a 10-year veteran of QVC. I started my career at QVC in London in their interactive department, and after 5 years of home shopping in London, I transferred to be the head of the graphics department at QVC just outside of Philadelphia. So that's how I came to move from England to the States. And then after 5 years of home shopping in America, I decided to make the transition to New York, and decided to really kind of focus back in on what I always had really, really loved doing, which was making things that people use, which wasn't always really the case if you have a career in television. You make a lot of things that people watch, but not necessarily a lot of things that people use. So what I wanted to get back to was to get into a position that was focused primarily on the web, but just on interactive in general. And I was fortunate enough to start chatting with the folks here at Corcoran. And a few interviews later, I started here back in 2006, and it's been great so far. I mean, we get to work on a whole bunch of very, very varied interactive projects here. My official title here is the Director of Interactive Product and Marketing. So I'm really responsible for anything that touches the public from a digital perspective. So primarily that's our website, Corcoran.com, but it also extends to mobile, social, video, even things that we do locally here in the city, like interactive touch screens in the back of taxi cabs, interactive billboards in Times Square, anything that sort of is public-facing and interactive. So that's really what I'm currently kind of focused on here.
Well, that really sounds like a fascinating job, and I believe you told me, and I'm only asking this from a human interest perspective, but didn't you also tell me that you had a part of your career was in the music industry?
Yeah, that's what actually brought me to New York. I was the creative director at Music Choice, which are those channels of digital music on your cable box. And we worked, we did a lot of work on events and interactive TV, the web, mobile, all manner of creative projects that you could possibly think would touch the music industry. But like I said, I really wanted to go back to focusing on what I love best, which is the internet, in whatever form the internet takes.
And what was the genesis of your interest and qualifications with regard to the, quote, the internet? How did you get into it? What skills did you learn? Do you have any specific training, or is it just a natural interest for you?
Yeah, I have a master's degree in interactive design. So I sort of come from a graphics background, if you like. I did my master's in the Netherlands after studying my bachelor's in London, and so I'm sort of a classically trained graphic designer originally, but in the late 90s when I was at college, people started to talk about this thing called the internet, and how it would start to connect computers together so you could talk to each other and share content. So my initial exposure to the internet was sort of via making things like CD-ROMs and sort of interactive DVDs and sort of disc-based things, and then that transitioned into websites and other sort of forms of digital publishing.
How did you end up going to school in the Netherlands? What was the course that led you there?
I have a bachelor's degree in art history, but what I always really loved was to not only to write about the kind of things that interested me in art history, but what I would do is make books. I would make books out of them. So this initial idea of digital publishing has been with me for some time. First on sort of like a word processor that spat out pages at I think it was like 2 pages every hour or something like that. Yeah, very, very, very slow in comparison. You would leave it sort of running overnight. But I was very interested in how you sort of start to build those things through the computer. So that became like an initial career in sort of print publishing. So I would learn things like Quark Express and things like that. But I was always more interested in things that people could use rather than sort of, set things. So I've never really been a print guy, although I've worked with a lot of print-oriented people, and I continue to do that to this day at Corcoran.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about Corcoran. Again, I'm totally clueless. I think real estate is very colloquial, and, it tends to be, we all tend to live in our own little bubbles wherever we do our business. And so, obviously, I came into that Inman event not being that familiar with Corcoran, which, of course, spurned my interest. So why don't you give the listeners a quick thumbnail about Corcoran and what its unique selling proposition is, or just anything you'd want the listeners to know about Corcoran?
Sure. I mean, we're one of Manhattan's largest residential brokerages, and we also have a very, very strong presence throughout Brooklyn and also in the East End of Long Island, basically the Hamptons region, and also down in Palm Beach area of Florida. So those are the markets that we're in. We are about 30 years old, and our founder, Barbara Corcoran, continues to be a fairly well-recognized national figure when it comes to talking about real estate. Obviously, she's still on TV shows like The Today Show, for example. But Barbara sold the company about 10 years ago, and a few years after that, the company rebranded. And part of that rebranding was to sort of overhaul the website and to completely kind of revamp what Corcoran was doing digitally. And that's about the same time that I came on here. So a lot of people still associate us with Barbara, as they rightfully should, but Barbara is no longer an active participant here at Corcoran. So one of the things that really drew me to work here was that Corcoran has always been very, very supportive of its interactive projects, whether that's the website or any kind of like new technology or different ways of marketing or using kind of digital platforms to help its clients or extend its brand reach. Corcoran has always done that throughout its history, and obviously the pace of that is very much accelerating at the moment. So that's really what drew me to Corcoran. Is this is somewhere where the kind of things that we're going to be working on are going to be very innovative and encouraged and supported and genuinely a lot of fun. And I'm very happy to say that that's absolutely true.
That's awesome. And I would think, and again, this is pure speculation, so correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the advantages of working in a market like Manhattan and the other areas that you mentioned, Palm Beach, the Hamptons, etc., and having some level of success is that probably provides some level of capital to fund the kind of things that a lot of real estate companies would like to do, but because the economy has been so horrific, so many companies have gone out of business and or they're just skating by. I think there's a lot of companies that maybe kind of would like to move in the directions that Corcoran's moving, but lack the funding to do so. So if I'm right about that, kudos to you and to Corcoran for being in a position to allow you to do those cool things.
It's sort of true. I mean, there's no, like, the kind of things that we're focused on right now, for example, like like social media, for example. There's no real sort of heavy investment from a financial perspective going on there. So do we have sort of are we investing in social media in that sense that you're talking about? No, but are we doing a lot of work within those areas? Yes, absolutely. So I see what you mean, but it's the kind of things that we're focused on tend to be a little bit more earned than bought.
Well, I was referring to your 7-figure salary.
Oh.
Just a bad attempt at humor there. I'm sorry. Forgive me. And I should have asked you this question back when you said what led me to think of the question, and I wanted to congratulate you on having a master's degree. That's very impressive. I didn't know that. One of the issues, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, I just want your kind of a narrow opinion on this question as I'm going to ask it. One of the issues that we've talked a lot about on this show is, the name of the show is Raise the Bar, and a lot of that has to do with potentially altering the requirements and educational requirements, experience requirements, ethics, whatever, of the real estate industry at large. And because you said you have a master's degree, I want your opinion on this question, which is, do you think the barrier to entry in real estate in general should be raised, or should there be one at all, or are things fine just the way they are?
That's a good question. I mean, I can't really speak to that from an agent perspective because I'm not an agent. While I work with agents, day in, day out, that's not really, I can't really speak to agent qualifications. But I think that one of the most important things is a sort of aptitude for customer service, which isn't really something to do with education, but more to do with approach, I think. And one of the things that we're particularly focused on here, I guess it's not even really like a Corcoran thing, it's a New York thing, is the quality of that customer service, the specific attention to detail, and the speed at which all of that happens. Things are very, very fast here in New York. Obviously, it's a stereotype, but it is somewhat true that getting back to people is a very important thing. But in terms of educational requirements, I'm not sure that I can really speak to that. It's more how you work than how qualified you are. I think is really what determines how successful you are in real estate, whether that's on the agent side or not. I hope that makes sense.
It does, and in fact, I don't recall where I read this. Excuse me. I don't recall where I read this, but I read this a couple of years ago that the number one predictor of success in real estate from a characteristic perspective is tenacity. And, we could talk all day long as to whether there's any correlation between having the characteristic of tenacity and being, more or less educated. And there's obviously exceptions to every rule. And again, I didn't want to get off on that tangent too much. I just was curious as to what your opinion was. And even though you are correct, obviously, in saying that, you're not an agent yourself, you have been a consumer of, purchasing and selling homes, I assume. And you probably have some, image that you've created in your mind as to the overall caliber of agents in America. So I'll just ask you that one final question on this line of questioning. What's your perspective as a consumer in the real estate transactions that you've been party to in terms of the overall level of, expertise and professionalism in real estate?
We had a very, just personally speaking, we had a very, very smooth home purchase when we bought our current home. And, one of the things that I think is really, really important is that it's somebody that actually understands what you're going through. Whether that's the same thing as tenacity, I'm not sure. But there's a level of empathy and understanding and ultimately patience that I think is really, really important to that whole process from the client side. And it's something that we really kind of really evangelize here at Corcoran is that level of understanding of the client that goes above and beyond just getting back to someone. It's really almost sort of like connecting with them on a
personal level,
neighborhood and local expertise level. Yeah, of course it's a personal level. It's one of the most stressful things you could ever do in your life is buy a home, and certainly financially as well. It's an enormous step for a lot of people, especially if you're a first-time buyer. So to have somebody guide you through that process, there's a lot that you invest in that one particular person in terms of their expertise and how you perceive that they're going to help you. And I think that level of service and that level of just understanding is a critical part of the transaction. So if we're talking about things like agent ROI on things like that, I think that it's really, really important that you work with somebody that is able to comfortably guide you through the process, not comfortably for them, but comfortably for you as the client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really well said. And obviously, I think that, as you said, all of that, the word that I kept thinking of, and you did say it, is empathy. And I think that you're right. For most people, that really is a massive part of the process. So thank you for answering that. So back to Corcoran more specifically. Corcoran has, did I have that number right, by the way? Was it $18 billion in sales in 2010?
It's actually 13 in 2010.
Gotcha. Still a giant number. So what would be, in your opinion, what's the secret of Corcoran's success, and what separates it from other Manhattan firms?
I think one of the key differentiators for Corcoran, and actually one of the main reasons that I really enjoy working here is its brand. I think that they really stand behind their brand here from an agent training perspective, from a marketing perspective, from an IT perspective. It's one of those things that it's very easy to characterize sort of brand direction within real estate companies as something that everybody sort of agrees on. But here, I would actually say it's actually very true. And I don't mean just, putting the logo on things. I mean more the philosophy of the brand. And you see it go through, like our social media efforts, for example, that we have this brand premise. One part of that is that, we believe that what is beyond the four walls of the apartment is just as important as the apartment itself. So you'll see us do a lot of, what's nearby. things or things to do in the neighborhood. Food is like a big thing for us, so obviously, especially here in Manhattan and Brooklyn. So this sort of like proximity of what's beyond the four walls is actually a really key differentiator for us. And, you know, one of the big differences in searching for real estate with Corcoran is that it's just as much a search for what is around the apartment as opposed to the apartment itself. So we believe that, you know, when you buy or rent a property, what is near that apartment is a very, very integral part of the process. And while an agent can kind of guide you through that in a very, you know, sort of hyper-local and experienced way, trying to translate that online is sort of what I'm basically accountable for. And, you know, you and I have spoken about this in the past. I have very strong thoughts about the sort of poor state of online real estate. I think searching for homes is essentially still within kind of like a Google-type model where it's checkboxes and drop-downs and then pages and pages of search results. Now, that isn't customer service, I think. It's like saying to someone, tell me how the market is doing, and then being given an Excel spreadsheet. You know, what the consumer, I believe, is more interested in is insight, advice, guidance, and to your phrase earlier, things that are more empathetic. Now, that seems to be the complete opposite to me of checkboxes and drop-downs and here's 1,000 search results that matched your criteria, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's interesting because I totally agree with what you said about, you know, I'll shorthand it by saying the neighborhood matters as much as the house. I've been preaching that for years in my own company, which is, and as an agent well before that, in the sense that I've always believed that, you know, in our case, it's not really a neighborhood, it's more of a community or a town, but the town matters more than the house. And I've always been, you know, perplexed by clients who would rather have a specific physical home more than the setting, the overall big picture setting that, you know, that will impact the quality of their life on a daily basis. So I think it's interesting that you stress that. I totally agree with you. Also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall either having a conversation with you on Twitter or perhaps I was watching the interview that you did with Chris Smith, Tech Savvy Agent, which was very interesting. You know, you talked a little bit about the current state, or maybe not the current state, the historical state of branding in real estate in general. Would you mind weighing in on your thoughts there? Because I found them very interesting.
Yeah, no problem. I honestly, I'm not entirely sure there is a historical conversation about branding in real estate. I find it very difficult to understand the differences between a lot of national real estate brands. And I know that you guys have sort of feel very passionate about this as well. I mean, I think I understand what the difference between a Zillow and a Trulia is, but I'm not sure I understand that at more of a brokerage kind of discussion. Now, within New York, we think that there are much clearer distinctions between some of the brokerages here, and I don't know if that's the island mentality that we have here on Manhattan, but you know, when it comes to like the national kind of conversation about real estate brands, it's a little trickier because, you know, you get sort of like almost like a dilution of brand strategy at that kind of scale, which I think is really, really interesting kind of conversation. Like, and you see national ad campaigns running for some of the larger guys, and they're indistinguishable from each other. I think, you know, they all seem to have like iconography with signs in the yard, for example, and you know, it doesn't really seem to be about like, well, we understand what it's like to live here, or here's how we're going to help you. It's more like we have the best agents, and for me that isn't really like a helpful message. But it seems to be kind of like a common thread that it's very often agent centered as opposed to actually consumer-centered from the branding side. And I think that's a really interesting kind of conversation at the national level, but not something that we experience here locally in New York, I think.
You know,
well,
Matthew,
you hit the. I'm sorry, Todd, go ahead.
No worries. Matthew, as Mike is going to say, I'm sure, you hit the nail on the head to kind of buttress your point. I know 1000 Watt threw out a post today where they were consulting with a smaller brokerage firm, if I'm not mistaken, and they were talking about how to handle leads as they came in. And the son of the founder of the brokerage, at the end of the post, turns out he is going to personally match the lead that comes in off of line, the consumer that comes in off of line, with the correct agent, no matter what the split is, no matter what the damage or benefit is to the brokerage itself. And so the underlying point there that I believe Mark was the writer, Mark Davison was the writer. The underlying point there is, hey, let's do right by the consumers. Put the consumer first. And when you go back to your discussion about national branding and how it pitches to the agents, how we've got the best, there are no, I don't want to say features or benefits necessarily, but there's no why would a consumer pick up the phone to call brokerage A as opposed to brokerage B, C, or D?
Right. I completely agree. I mean, one of the things we talk a lot about here at Corcoran is the commoditization of listings. I mean, I think, you can get listings anywhere now. And, the idea, I mean, especially online. So if everybody can get listings everywhere, what really is the difference between brands? And that really becomes very, very important when everybody can get all the information in as many different places as possible. So, then it becomes a conversation about what do you stand for? And I think that's what you mean, like what's your why, if you like. And from a seller and a buyer side. And I think that, that actually becomes a very, very critical part of a brokerage's business model is how do we get people in a sea of search results to understand that ours stands for something either of a higher quality or a better service, or it means something different than these other 10 that we're sort of being filtered in with.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. In fact, I just want to amplify the prior point about, agent-centric versus consumer-centric, because I think that is just a critical point. And again, trying to look at it from the perspective of a consumer myself, how would I react to that? And I'm just amazed when I go to the websites of some of the big brands and I see that they have right there for anyone to find that we are an agent. This is a quote. We are an agent-centric brand, and there's a whole list of reasons why that brand stands for the agent. It's there for the agent and all that. And Matthew, I don't know if you remember this or not. I'm guessing you will remember this. When we were in New York on stage, at one point, we had a third participant, and she said that, this is a quote, she said, our agents are our clients. Do you remember that?
I do, and I remember disagreeing with her.
Yeah, and I all but jumped out of my chair, and I said straight up, I totally disagree with that. My view is that our clients are our clients, and perhaps our agents stand on equal footing, but the worst case for the consumer is that they're at least as important as our agents. And I just, the fact that person said that so plainly and so matter-of-factly, and, I just know from talking with a lot of people and from observing how other companies behave, particularly in social media, and seeing that either they're clearly pitching their message to agents or they're bragging about their sales and the number of agents and all that kind of thing, which I'm not saying that's not indicative of some level of success. Obviously it is. I'm just saying I don't think that's the message I want to be putting out, even if I could. And I'll tell you what impresses me the most about you, Matthew, other than just the fact that I met you, is I watch what you do on Twitter every day. And you are representing your brand really well, and you're doing it in a way that is very consistent with the philosophies that we have in terms of, you're constantly talking about food, for example. And we don't talk about food at all, but you're differentiating yourself because you're doing that. And as a result, I'm constantly clicking on links that you put out because I'm just curious. And I think that's exactly what you're trying to do, is make people curious about what you're tweeting about, and also the fact that you're not just, regurgitating all these stats about look at all the sales we have and look at all the agents we have, or whatever other traditional message you might be putting out. So I just wanted to tip my hat to you because I think you're doing it right.
Great, that's awesome to hear, Mike. Thanks so much. I mean, people often ask me like what our strategy is, and honestly, I don't think we've ever actually sat down and had a meeting about social media here. We don't really have a strategy. I like waking up in the morning not knowing what we're going to post, and being reactive that way. All that we really do is reflect what life is like here. Our sort of philosophy, if you like, is to simply hold a mirror up to what life is like here in New York. So, New Yorkers are very, very passionate about two things in particular: food and real estate. And our Facebook page, for example, is really a great intersection of those two things. Now, we might do sports, for example, like we have a big sports story for Carmelo here today, joining the Knicks, and that might be something that we put out, or what shopping, nightlife, things to do around the city. Like yesterday, for example, like we ran an all-day quiz for presidential history in and around New York, and it was a lot of fun. It was very timely, and it was great to see people's kind of responses to the kind of quiz questions that we were asking. But none of that is an agent-centric conversation. That's entirely client-focused.
Yep.
So, we actually don't, in that kind of marketing context, there really is no tremendous benefit for us to brag about our sales statistics, or, our audience isn't other agents in that sense. It's people interested in living in New York, moving within New York, or moving to New York, and trying to sort of own the city from that perspective is a massive undertaking, but it's so much fun. And if that's your marketing initiative, that sounds like a pretty strong one to me, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but it's. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I know what I was going to say is, you get up in the morning, you don't know what you're necessarily going to be, social media-ing about that day. I tell people all the time, because, one of the things that a lot of real estate professionals who want to get into social media, they frequently say something like this: well, I don't know what to tweet about. I have no idea what to blog about. I have no idea what to Facebook about. And I think it's so much easier than people make it, because rather than just being themselves and interacting with what they see, I mean, if you analyze what I put out in social media, I would be willing to bet you that 80% of it is reacting to something somebody else said. All I'm doing is, I develop a relationship with people over time, and they put out something, and I just say, like, hey, that was a cool link, Matthew, or I totally disagree with that, Matthew, or whatever. You just start the conversation. And that, I'm always confused by people who seem to suggest that this is difficult, because in my mind, if you can't talk to people, I mean, at the essence of it, all we're doing is talking to people. If you can't talk to people, you probably shouldn't be selling real estate. I mean, that's just the way I feel. You have to communicate to do the job. So if you can communicate with a person face-to-face across a table with over a cup of coffee, it seems to me you should be able to do social media. Would you agree with that philosophy or not?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that folks within real estate are essentially in the relationship business, and whether it's social media or any other form of online presence, all you're really doing is growing relationships digitally. And as more and more people spend more time online, in whatever form, it seems to me to be a very natural transition to grow relationships in this other place. And I think in many ways it's what realtors have always done. It's just in a different form.
Yep. It's a different medium.
Yeah, and also, and I know that, this question always comes up, and I don't want to waste any time talking about it now, really, unless you do, Matthew, but, this whole conversation about what's the ROI of social media, I would argue that at its core, it simply can't be measured. You'll never know how many people you impacted, and you'll never know that, somebody that you had a very brief exchange with on Twitter today might end up buying a $5 million apartment in New York with Corcoran Group 18 months from now because they just remember that they had a nice interaction with you. You'll never be able to measure that. But I think that when you look around and you look at all the obvious trends about Facebook usage and Twitter usage and all that, to me it's just a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people trying to quantify the results of social media, whether that's Facebook Insights, Google Analytics, things like Clout. There's a lot of attempts to measure it, and I agree with you. It's very, very difficult to measure your relationship with someone because at its core there's no algorithm for how you feel about something, and
yep.
I think real estate is actually one of those emotionally driven industries because I think in many ways the purchase of a home is an emotional one, just as much, if not more, than being a financial one. Certainly, like when I was looking at homes to purchase, you could tell if it felt right as soon as you walked through the door, and that's a stronger driver of a purchase than whether the price feels right. I think it's like, can I picture myself here? Can I, do I see myself and my family in this apartment, for example? Now, it's not to say that the finances aren't important. Of course, they're crucially important. But I think that trying to measure the specific emotional kind of quotient of how you feel about something or what your relationship is a really difficult thing. It's like it's like trying to remember the first time you had a Coke. Like you don't know why you like Coke, but you just you're either like a Coke or a Pepsi person. And what's the ROI of my relationship with Coke? Well, I don't know, but I know that I like it. I hope that makes sense. But it's a really, really difficult thing to measure. But because it's online and because so many things online are measurable, and that's been one of the big sort of selling points of online, especially versus print, for example. Because of its extreme measurability, when it comes to social media, there's lots of attempts to do the same thing. But it's a really, really difficult thing to do because you're trying to quantify, sort of nebulous emotions, and it's almost impossible because it changes all the time as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In fact, I'm curious, given what you do for a living, how is your performance measured? Is that an issue that you contend with as you do your job in terms of reporting to whomever you report to? Mm-hmm. Or do they just sort of give you a carte blanche and trust your expertise and let you go and trust that, you're doing the right things to create the right results? I've always wondered about that whenever I speak to anybody that has a job that has the word social media anywhere near it.
Sure. Social media is very simply put, just one of the things that I do here at Corcoran, but that's not to say that we don't have measurable goals set around what we do. There's certain things from just a pure footprint and exposure base that we look at, trying to grow our audience by, X% annually, whether that's, followers on Foursquare, fans on Facebook, or whatever it is. But obviously, we look at things like engagement rates. What these people are actually doing is one of the more important things that we look at. So, it's not enough for us to have, a massive audience. I would rather have, 10 people that are passionate evangelists of Corcoran than 10,000 people that have tuned us out. Mm-hmm. So, engagement rates are really, really key for us, especially when it comes to something like Facebook. Like how people are sharing our content is a really interesting statistic. But for us, it's almost like that customer service thing that I was talking about with agents. It's just a way for us to listen to people, and I'm not sure that you can really kind of quantify that. It's like tell us what you think you might be interested in, and how we can help you with that. I'm not sure if you can measure ROI on something like that. It's you either do help them or you don't help them, or you sort of help them, I guess. But for us, it's a chance to meet interesting people. It's a chance for us to share what we believe to be interesting and fun content. And there's, like I said before, there's measurable goals set around it. And I'm happy to say that those goals are actually translating into business, which is a fantastic thing to see. But it's more about marketing and brand exposure for us right now than actual lead gen, although both happen.
Interesting. And this is not to shift gears too horribly here, but it just occurred to me. What's your policy, or do you have a policy regarding social media usage by your agents? Because, like in your case, you are the guy that runs, and my focus is primarily Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time, as I think you know. I watch what you do, and that's exclusively Matthew Shadbolt, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that being said, do you have specific policies in place for your other agents, and do you have other agents who are active in Twitter? Do you monitor what they do? Do you have a policy? Just respond in general to that line of thought.
Yeah, I mean, we have many agents that use social media here at Corcoran, and with a broad spectrum of success in terms of what they deem to be successful, or what we would deem to be successful. In general, there are a set of guidelines that we have established for agent use of social media, and it's things that govern the use of fair housing policies and sort of anti-discrimination things and things of that nature to really get them buttoned up in terms of what they're saying, which is obviously very, very important, not only for them but also for Corcoran. So there's actually the sort of legal aspect of using these things, which is very, very critical. But also, we have substantial education programs for should I even be doing this kind of that kind of perspective, because for many I think it's very uncharted territory. I think this is something that you and I have spoken about a lot. I hear the word "should" a lot directed at agents. You should be on Twitter. You should be doing Foursquare, or your business is dead in 3 years if you're not on Facebook, because that's where everyone is. I mean, things like that. And it can get a bit silly if you already have a very successful offline business, for example. It can be very confusing and very sort of misguiding for people to have that kind of advice given to them, I think. So, sure, I mean, there are definitely policies set around Corcoran agents' use of it, as there are policies set around the use of what I do. But education is a really, really big factor of what we do here. Even just sort of knowing about what is possible and using a problem-solving approach to build it into how to grow your business. So not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but actually doing it with some kind of purpose and goal in mind.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I guess the only place where I would, and I don't even want to say differ with you because that's too strong, but I have this feeling, and perhaps I'm doing exactly what you're accusing others of doing, but I truly believe this in my heart, that the way that our culture is shifting towards social media, that I do fear for the agent who wants to completely ignore the trend. That's not to suggest that they still can't be successful using the traditional, methods that are entirely offline. But whether we're talking 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, because nobody really knows that. But I do think at some point, if you don't have any experience in or familiarity with or have made no efforts towards social media, at some point I think that will hurt an agent's business, and that's all I'll say about that. Otherwise, I completely agree with you. And I'm also keeping along the same trend of thought that you were going down there. And I'm always disappointed when I see people who are supposed social media gurus who are dispensing what I know to be bad advice. And not only that, but just this whole arena is so dynamic and so quickly changing that it's my honest opinion there are no experts. And anybody who holds themselves out as such is really, that's somebody I'm not going to listen to right from the start. And do you agree with that?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, I've lost count of the amount of Jedis, rock stars, evangelists. I mean, I had a guy give me his business card and it said sales assassin on it. And I said to him, I was like, it's a typo, right? Is it supposed to be sales association? And he said, no. I was like, okay. I mean, it's really not helpful, I think, in the long term, and sort of self-appointed, social media Jedis or ninjas or whatever it is. I think I tend to. I don't know if it's the New Yorker in me, but we don't have much patience for that here. I mean, I think there's in all seriousness, that there's a tremendous amount of information being thrown at the agent community in general about these kinds of things, whether it's in the press or one-on-one or conversations over dinner or just simply cold calling. That is very frightening and intimidating for a lot of folks. I think as an industry, we're still not entirely there just with being online, let alone anything more
totally
complex
agree.
like social. I mean, it's a very common story to hear of agents that don't have any kind of handheld device, for example, or agents that print out emails to read them. In many regards, we're not there yet. And my role is to guide those kind of folks along in the conversation about how to transition their business to really where people are, not where people were.
Well, it's interesting, too, what you just said there about the fact that many in our industry really haven't even, caught up to the curve in terms of basic internet strategy and SEO and, having a decent website and lead creation and capture and all that. And I guess that sort of reinforces the point I was trying to make a minute ago about, I do believe that people need to do something regarding social media only because I see the technology, and when I say technology, I'm lumping, traditional internet SEO, that kind of thing, with social media. I see that trend. It's ramping up fast enough, and the metrics that I look at, and I'm not an expert on these things. It's just a part of it's intuition, part of it's just common sense. But I just see the trend ramping up and becoming steeper and steeper, and I just fear for the people who still haven't even caught up on the web stuff, the basic web stuff. And so that sort of is fueling my overall philosophy on this, which is, come on, people, get in the game, because we believe at Professional One, this drives so much of what we do, this thought. And the thought is, we see a digital divide coming, and again, I don't know if it's in a year or 2 or 5 or 10, but it's going to happen, I truly believe, where the agents who don't have a certain level of sophistication and understanding, or at least are not in position to pay somebody to do that for them, are going to be left behind. I see a concentration of the industry in a smaller and smaller group who are becoming greater and greater in terms of their tech savviness. And I know Chris Smith and what he's doing with Tech Savvy Agent. That's been sort of a microcosm for me to observe in terms of what he's done, and he's done a phenomenal job in seeing the reaction of a percentage of the agent population, et cetera. It's just again throwing gasoline on the fire of that thought for me.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you there. I mean, I think that we're under no illusions that the digital aspect of business here at Corcoran is very much in the minority. 70% of Corcoran's business is still, offline referrals. And I think that that's an important statistic to consider when we're having this kind of conversation. I do think that, what you're talking about is really social blending with or becoming search. And I think that, if people truly start to find things on the internet through their friends or through their networks, if you like, then essentially the Google model goes away, which is that's a terrifying shift for some people, I think, because if you find things through recommendations, or this is how the real world works, right? You ask, should I go and see this movie tonight? And your friend tells you no, but the TV and the advertising says yes. So which one do you believe? You usually believe your friend, I think. So if search starts to become social, you see sort of like Google wrestling with this, and you also see Facebook wrestling with it, and obviously the two organizations are kind of butting up against each other right now. But real estate is right in the middle of that whole conversation, I think. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens there. I believe that the person doing real estate searches needs a lot of help, especially in terms of trying to find an agent to work with. Because usually what you get when you go to like find an agent kind of pages is a gallery of headshots. No way of being able to find an agent, I think.
And you totally agree.
And Matthew, to go down that line with you, I had the opportunity a few years ago to counsel someone basically who was considering entering the real estate business. And this person did, is an agent a couple of towns north of us here, actually. And this person started clean, fresh book of business, literally fresh book of business, as in knew nobody when they were here. And just working with them last year, chatting with them, they said to me, Todd, it took me 2 years. 2 years of online involvement to go from no contacts to an actual, God-honest, physical closing as an agent to somebody that I had met, connected with, and closed as a result of working with via social networking. And it was really interesting to have that blank slate, if you will, that blank example that said, I have no book of business, I started doing this, and 2 years later, this is what happened. Now, not to say that it took them 2 years to close something. They did have connections and referrals and stuff like that in between, but that's a pretty good indicator there of, and I found this to be true when I started out in the business myself, never mind using social media, but just myself. It took about 2 years till a good head of steam got picked up and referrals started coming in from friends and family, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we totally agree. I mean, we started our social media efforts about 2.5 years ago, first with a Twitter account, and then about six months after that we started on Facebook. And, I mean, we see a very similar kind of time frame. It took us about 2 years to reach the kind of point of critical mass with it.
There it is. Yep.
Yeah, and Matthew, we're just burning through this hour. We're literally down to a little over 2 minutes left, and I still have a whole list of questions. I have a whole list of questions that I wanted to ask you that we're not going to get to, unfortunately, and I apologize for that. But we always like to leave a little bit of time at the end for our guests to say anything they want to say. If you don't have anything you want to say, that's cool. We can move on to the next question. But if this is your chance to just sort of riff however you like for the next 2 minutes-ish.
Okay, no pressure, right? I mean, one of the things that I think, we haven't spoken about today is how important mobile technology is to everything that we're talking about. I think that if you're in a what's nearby kind of industry, I think the phone, the smartphone, or anything that has GPS in it, it becomes a really, really important tool for how people find things. And if we're talking about blending mobile, social, and search together, that happens on the phone. That doesn't really happen on the desktop computer. So what is in people's hands? I mean, this is actually more of an acute issue in cities, I think. But what is in people's hands as they are, walking around, for example, becomes a very, very critical place to be. And that's been a lot of our focus here at Corcoran. And as as the future unfolds here, we're very interested to see how those kind of things converge, whether it's the desktop with the phone or the car with the phone. We're very interested to see how what real estate play is going to be with things like cars, televisions, things like that. I think, if anybody's following what Howard Stern is doing on Twitter, I think that's a really, really interesting way to use Twitter and TV. One of the things people forget with all this stuff is that it's such an exciting time to be doing all of this. We are right at the beginning of all of this stuff. And, if you are right involved with all of this stuff, I mean, it's so new. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they're all, kind of like less than 10 years old, all of these things. And, it's really, really, and it's such an exciting point in our industry's history that it seems to make a lot of sense to me to embrace it.
Totally agree. And we are unfortunately out of time. In fact, we're now off the air. But Matthew, thank you so much for being on the show. You were an outstanding guest, as I knew you would be. We really appreciate your time and your insight. Very smart guy, and we look forward to furthering and continuing our relationship in the coming years. And we wish you and the Corcoran Group all the best.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been such a lot of fun.
Good chatting, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew.
Guys.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.